هذا مزيف، هذا مزيف.
The air in the restaurant's private dining room was worth more than the building itself. It was thick with the scent of aged leather, expensive cologne, and a deal so massive it felt like a living entity. At the table sat two men, one a billionaire sheikh, whose name was a key to unlocking global markets, the other a dealer of rare antiquities with a smile as smooth as polished jade. Between them lay a velvet-lined case holding a scepter rumored to be worth $200 million. But they were not alone. A waitress refilling their water was the only one who understood the truth, and she was about to detonate a bomb of a single word that would save one man and destroy the other. The Gilded Lyre wasn't just a restaurant. It was a theatre where the world's most powerful players performed their elaborate ballets of commerce and influence. Tonight, the stage was the exclusive Medici suite, a room soundproofed against the mortal world with a view of the city that made the sprawling metropolis look like a carpet of scattered diamonds. And I, Lena Petrova, was just part of the scenery, a ghost in a crisp black uniform, trained to be invisible to anticipate a need for water before thirst was felt to clear a plate with the silence of a passing thought. For 3 years this had been my life. A life of folded napkins and polished silver, a steep fall from the world of dusty manuscripts and academic accolades I once called home. I was once Dr. Petrova, a rising star in the field of Near Eastern antiquities, a specialist in dead languages and lost dynasties. Now I was just Lena the waitress, who was surprisingly good at remembering who took their coffee black. The Gilded Lyre paid the bills, and more importantly, it was anonymous. No one here knew about the professor who stole my life's work, published it under his own name, and blacklisted me from every reputable institution. Here my past was as dead as the ancient kings I once studied. Tonight's performance in the Medici suite was a masterclass in power. The guest of honor was Sheikh Tariq Al-Jamil, a man whose modern business empire was built on old family money that stretched back centuries. He was in his 50s, with a stillness that was more intimidating than any overt display of strength. His eyes, dark and intelligent, missed nothing. He didn't look like a man who was easily impressed. Across from him sat Arthur Finch, a man who sold history to the highest bidder. Finch was everything the sheikh was not: flamboyant, effusive, his charisma, a tangible force in the room. He was dressed in a bespoke suit that probably cost more than my car, and his every gesture was calculated to charm and disarm. It is without exaggeration the find of the century. Finch was saying, his voice a low, reverent hum. He gestured to a heavy, ornate case resting on a stand between them. The scepter of Adad Nirari III, lost for millennia. The last true link to his reign, a symbol of a power that shaped the very cradle of civilization. Sheikh Tariq said nothing. He simply watched Finch, his fingers steepled before him, his expression unreadable. My job was to pour the sparkling water, a 100-a-bottle brand that tasted to me exactly like tap water. As I leaned in, my senses were on high alert. This was not a normal dinner. The tension was a low-frequency hum beneath Finch's smooth sales pitch. The sheikh's 2 bodyguards stood like statues by the door, their eyes scanning the room, even me, with cold professionalism. The provenance is impeccable, of course. Finch continued pulling a leather-bound folio from his briefcase. We've traced it through a private collection in Geneva, belonging to a family who had no idea what they possessed. They thought it was a 19th-century ceremonial piece. He chuckled a sound like shaking dice. Imagine. I moved to the other side of the table to refill Finch's glass. My proximity was a professional necessity, but my mind was whirring. Adad Nirari threat. An Assyrian king. My mind, a library of forgotten facts, instantly pulled up the file. I could almost feel the phantom weight of the textbooks, the smell of old paper and ink. My doctoral thesis had touched upon the very artifacts of his era. May I the Sheikh finally spoke. His voice was a deep baritone, calm and measured. Of course, Tariq. Of course, Finch said, practically purring with anticipation. He produced a small key and unlocked the case. With a flourish, he lifted the lid. The room fell silent. Even the city outside seemed to hold its breath. Nestled on a bed of deep blue velvet was a scepter. It was about 2 feet long, crafted from a dark, lustrous metal that seemed to drink the light, inlaid with veins of gold and capped with a massive uncut lapis lazuli. It was beautiful, undeniably ancient in its appearance. A hush of reverence fell over the room. I could see a flicker of something in Sheikh Tariq's eyes, not greed, but something deeper. Awe. Longing. It was the look of a man seeing not an object, but a connection to his very soul his heritage made manifest. The inscription, Tariq murmured, his voice softer now. He leaned closer, his gaze fixed on the delicate, cuneiform script spiraling around the scepter's handle. The royal dedication Finch supplied helpfully. Our experts at the Institute have translated it. It confirms the lineage and dedicates the scepter to the temple of Nabu. I finished pouring the water and began my silent retreat back towards the wall. But as I moved, my eyes snagged on the inscription. From across the room, it was just a series of delicate wedge-shaped marks. But my mind, trained over years of obsessive study, saw more than that. It saw language, it saw syntax and grammar and history. And in that one fleeting glance, a single character, one tiny, almost insignificant wedge jumped out at me. It was wrong. It was a grammatical form, a particular style of cuneiform that didn't exist for another 200 years after Adad Nirari III was dust. It was like seeing a Shakespearean manuscript written with a ballpoint pen. A cold dread washed over me. My carefully constructed wall of anonymity, my quiet life of serving the rich and forgetting who I used to be, suddenly had a crack in it. My heart began to pound against my ribs. Finch was still talking, weaving a beautiful tapestry of lies around the object in the case. The Sheikh was listening, his expression softening, his professional guard slowly being lowered by the siren song of his own history. He was about to spend $200 million on a lie, and I, the invisible waitress, was the only person in the world who knew it. My training screamed at me to retreat, to melt back into the shadows of the service corridor. It's not your problem, Lena. It's not your world anymore. The last time I had pointed out an academic discrepancy, it had cost me everything. My mentor, Dr. Alistair Sallow, a man I'd revered, had smiled, patted my shoulder, and then systematically erased me from the academic world, all to claim my discovery as his own. The memory was a scar, and Finch's oily charm was pressing right on it. But my intellect, the part of me that had stubbornly refused to die, wouldn't let it go. It was a puzzle, and my brain was already solving it without my permission. The incorrect cuneiform character was just the beginning. As I stood by the service station, feigning to polish a wine glass, my eyes kept darting back to the scepter. I mentally enlarged the image, rotating it, analyzing it. Finch was pointing to the lapis lazuli stone, and this Tariq is the star of Asher. The legends say it was a gift from the heavens, that it fell to earth on a chariot of fire. The stone itself is priceless, of course, but its history, that is invaluable. Sheikh Tariq was captivated. He reached out a hand not to touch the scepter, but as if to feel the warmth of its history, the echo of his ancestors. My family traces its lineage back to that region, he said, his voice thick with a rare emotion. For generations, stories of these treasures were just that stories told to children. To see this, it is like finding the heart of my own history. That was the hook. Finch had done his research. He wasn't just selling an object. He was selling a man his own identity, a tangible piece of a legacy he had spent his life honoring through his modern empire. The $200 million wasn't an expense. It was a pilgrimage. My focus returned to the script. The anachronistic character was the most glaring error, but now other, more subtle flaws began to surface in my mind's eye. The spacing between the characters was too uniform, too perfect. Ancient scribes carving by hand into metal had inconsistencies. Their work was beautifully imperfect. This looked like it had been etched with modern precision, a machine-like regularity that screamed forgery. Then there was the language itself. Finch had mentioned a dedication to the Temple of Nabu, while Adad-Nirari III did pay tribute to the god Nabu. The specific phrasing Finch's experts had likely provided would be crucial. The dialect of Akkadian used in Royal Assyrian inscriptions had a unique cadence, specific honorifics that were non-negotiable. I would bet my life that a forger, even a good one, would slip up. They always did. They'd use a more common Babylonian variant, or a later Neo-Assyrian phrasing mistakes that only a handful of specialists in the world would ever catch. Specialists like me. I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just a simple scam. It was an act of profound cultural vandalism. It was a beautiful, intricate lie designed to prey on a man's deepest sense of self. And Finch was the perfect predator, his words wrapping around the Sheikh's reverence like a python. "We can have my people finalize the transfer in the morning," the Sheikh said, his voice firming as he shifted from historical awe to decisive business. "I'll have the scepter moved to my private vault by midday tomorrow." An excellent decision. Finch beamed, his eyes glittering with triumph. "You are not just buying an artifact, Tariq. You are reclaiming a birthright." My blood ran cold. The deal was done. In a matter of hours, a fortune would be transferred, and this expertly crafted fake would be sealed away in a vault, its fraudulent status forever cemented as truth. Finch would vanish, and the Sheikh would be left with a hollow piece of metal and a stolen story. I looked at Sheikh Tariq. I saw the quiet dignity in his posture, the genuine heartfelt connection he felt to the object. He wasn't just another arrogant billionaire flaunting his wealth. He was a custodian of his family's history, and he believed he had found its most precious jewel. To let him be deceived felt like a betrayal, not just of him, but of the very history I had dedicated my life to. My hand, the one holding the polishing cloth, was trembling. My career was gone. My reputation was in tatters. I had nothing to lose but a dead-end job. But I also had nothing to gain but the wrath of two very powerful men. If I was wrong, I would be utterly humiliated, likely fired, and possibly sued. If I was right, I would be making a powerful enemy in Arthur Finch, and unmasking a deception in front of a man who did not suffer fools gladly. The bodyguards by the door seemed to grow taller. The sound of my own breathing was suddenly loud in my ears. Sheikh Tariq nodded to Finch, a gesture of finality. They were about to shake hands. It was now or never. The ghost in the black uniform had to decide if she was going to speak. The moment stretched thin and fragile as spun glass. The two men stood, Finch extending his hand, his face a mask of triumphant cordiality. Sheikh Tariq was about to accept it. The currents of history, both real and fabricated, were converging on this single handshake. My mind was a battlefield. The cautious, wounded part of me, the part that remembered the sneer on Professor Sallow's face as he dismissed my concerns before, stealing my work, screamed at me to stay silent. You are a waitress. You serve wine. You do not get involved in the affairs of titans. That voice was compelling, born of humiliation and fear. It reminded me of the months of unemployment, the crushing weight of student debt, the bitter taste of betrayal that had soured my passion. But another voice, older and more stubborn, pushed back. It was the voice of the young girl who had first fallen in love with the past, who spent hours in libraries, tracing the lines of dead languages, believing that truth was the most sacred thing of all. That voice whispered that silence was a form of complicity. To stand by and watch this happen was to be a partner in the lie. It would be the final ultimate surrender, an admission that Professor Sallow had truly broken me. I looked at the scepter again. It was a masterful fake, I had to admit. The forger was brilliant, an artist of deception. But art has a signature, and so does fraud. The signature here was hubris, the belief that no one would ever look closely enough, that the story was so good the object wouldn't matter. My eyes met Sheikh Tariq's for a fraction of a second. He wasn't looking at me, not really. His gaze was distant already in the future, imagining the scepter in a place of honor. But in that fleeting glance, I saw the sincerity that Finch was exploiting. This wasn't a transaction for him. It was a homecoming. The fear in my chest was a cold, physical knot. But beneath it, a different feeling was beginning to smolder anger. A pure, clean anger at the desecration of history, at the arrogance of men like Finch and Sallow, who believed their greed was more important than truth. My feet felt rooted to the floor. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Say something. Just one word. But what could I say? Excuse me, sir, but I believe your multi-million-dollar artifact is a fake. They would laugh me out of the room. I needed to do something that would cut through the noise, something that would force them to listen. I thought about the inscription, the dedication to the Temple of Nabu. That was the key. Finch had a translation from his experts. But the true language, the precise dialect of Assyrian cuneiform, was a living thing in my mind. The Sheikh's hand was now just inches from Finch's. My body moved before my mind could stop it. Taking a sharp, silent breath, I walked forward, my tray held in one hand. I moved with the practiced ease of a server, my path taking me right between the two men. It was a brazen, unthinkable breach of protocol. As I passed the table, my hand, the one holding the tray, jerked, as if I had stumbled. A crystal glass of water full to the brim tipped and fell. It didn't shatter. It landed with a dull thud on the plush Persian rug, spilling its contents in a dark, spreading stain, inches from Finch's expensive leather shoes. Oh, I gasped, my voice sounding convincingly flustered. Terribly sorry, sir. So clumsy of me. The handshake was aborted. Both men looked down, startled. Finch recoiled with a hiss of annoyance. The bodyguards tensed their hands, moving instinctively towards their jackets. The diversion had worked. It bought me 3 seconds. It put me right beside the scepter. I knelt to retrieve the glass, my movements still disguised as a clumsy waitress's apology. My eyes were level with the velvet case. Now was the moment. My voice came out not loud, but clear and sharp, cutting through the sudden silence of the room. It was not addressed to Finch, but directly to Sheikh Tariq. I didn't speak in English. I spoke a single word in the classical Akkadian dialect, the language of the inscription itself. It was the word for falsehood or deception. Satu. Then, looking directly at the scepter's inscription, I pointed to one of the characters. I spoke again this time, a short, grammatically correct phrase from that era, the one a true scribe would have used. My pronunciation was flawless, the guttural consonants and precise vowels echoing strangely in the modern air-conditioned room. It was a sound that had not been spoken aloud by many for over 2,000 years. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The world stopped. Finch froze his face, a kaleidoscope of confusion, then dawning horror. The sheikh, who had been looking down at the spilled water, snapped his head up. His eyes locked onto mine. The mask of the calm businessman fell away, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. He hadn't just heard a foreign language. He had heard the language of his ancestors spoken perfectly by the woman who had just served him his water. I rose slowly, the empty glass in my trembling hand. The silence was deafening. The bluff had been called. The invisible woman had just spoken, and the entire room was waiting to see what she would say next. The silence in the Medici suite was no longer one of reverence, but of sharp, crystalline tension. Sheikh Tariq's eyes, which had been filled with historical awe moments before, were now narrowed, boring into me, with an intensity that was far more intimidating. He was no longer looking at a waitress. He was looking at an anomaly, a variable he could not account for. Arthur Finch was the first to recover. He forced a short, barking laugh that held no humour. Well, it seems the staff here are quite the performers. My apologies, Tariq, for the interruption. He waved a dismissive hand at me. Young lady, that's quite enough. You've made a mess. Go and get someone to clean it up. He was trying to wrestle back control, to paint me as an eccentric, perhaps unstable employee. I didn't move. My gaze remained locked with the sheikh's. I had thrown the first stone, and now I had to stand my ground. She spoke in old Akkadian. Tariq said, his voice a low rumble. He wasn't asking, he was stating a fact. His expression was a mixture of disbelief and intense curiosity. He ignored Finch completely. Who are you? He asked the question directed at me like a physical force. Before I could answer, Finch stepped forward, his face flushing with anger. This is absurd. She's a waitress. Probably heard a word from a documentary. Tariq, please, let's not allow this circus act to derail our business. The word she used, Tariq, continued his focus, still entirely on me, Sartu. It means lie, deception, a forgery. He took a step closer to the table, his eyes flicking from my face to the inscription on the scepter. And the phrase she spoke, it was a correction, a grammatical correction. Finch's composure began to fray at the edges. A tiny bead of sweat traced a path down his temple. This is ridiculous. My experts from the most prestigious institute in Zurich have authenticated this piece. Are you going to take the word of a server over a team of world-renowned academics? It was the opening I needed. Which institute, I asked, my voice steady now, the adrenaline sharpening my senses. The Ziegler Institute for Antiquities. Finch's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He had mentioned Zurich, a common hub for such things, but I had named the most famous and famously corrupt institution, a place known for providing authentications for a price. It was a guess, but a highly educated one. His slight hesitation told me I'd hit the mark. Their reputation is flawless, Finch stammered, recovering quickly. Their reputation, I countered, stepping away from the spilled water and closer to the table, is for authenticating whatever their clients pay them to authenticate. Ask them about the Hittite tablets they verified in 2018. They were exposed as fakes made in eastern Turkey 6 months later. The sheikh's head turned slowly from me to Finch. The seed of doubt had been planted and was beginning to sprout. She's read a few articles. So what? Finch snapped, his voice rising in pitch. She's trying to disrupt a major transaction for attention security. He glanced towards the bodyguards. Get her out of here." The two men by the door looked at their employer. The sheikh gave a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of his head. They remained still. In that moment, the power in the room had irrevocably shifted. "Let her speak," Tariq commanded. All eyes were on me. The years of suppressed knowledge of silent frustration and passion came rushing to the surface. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, righteous certainty. "The scepter is a fake," I said, my voice ringing with an authority I hadn't felt in years, and a clumsy one at that. Finch let out a gasp of theatrical outrage. "Clumsy? It's a masterpiece. It's a masterpiece of deception, I'll grant you," that I conceded. "The forger is skilled, but he's not a historian. He's an artist who has studied the form but not the substance. He made mistakes, anachronisms." Tariq gestured towards the scepter. "Show me." I took a deep breath. This was my thesis defense all over again, but this time the stakes were infinitely higher. First, the inscription itself. I pointed, careful not to touch the object. The character for the royal determinative, the wedge that precedes the king's name, is in the Neo-Assyrian style. That style wasn't standardized for another 200 years after Adad-Nirari III. It's the equivalent of finding the signature of Julius Caesar written in modern cursive. I could see the sheikh's eyes following my finger, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was a man who dealt in details, and he was listening. Second, I continued gaining confidence the spacing. Look at the uniformity between the symbols. It's too perfect. This was likely planned on a computer and etched with a precision tool, probably a laser. An ancient scribe hammering onto metal would have left minute imperfections, variations in depth and spacing. This has none. It's lifeless. "These are wild accusations," Finch blustered. "Am I wrong?" I challenged, looking him straight in the eye. "Provide the high-resolution microscopic analysis. Not the glossy photos in your folio, but the raw data. I guarantee it will show microscopic scoring and melting patterns consistent with modern tools, not the compression marks of ancient ones." The color was draining from Finch's face. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. And finally I said, delivering the final blow, the name of the man who likely made this. "The style is familiar. The combination of brilliant metallurgy and careless historical errors has a signature. It's the work of a man named Dr. Alastair Sallow." At the mention of that name, Arthur Finch flinched as if he'd been struck. It was a small, reflexive movement, but in the hypercharged atmosphere of the room, it was a confession. Sheikh Tariq saw it. I saw it. The game was over. The Waitress had just rewritten the entire play. The name hung in the air heavy and damning. Alastair Sallow. My personal demon, the ghost at the feast of my life. For years his name had been a source of pain and powerlessness. Now I had turned it into a weapon. Sheikh Tariq's gaze shifted from Finch's pale, stricken face to mine. The suspicion in his eyes was slowly being replaced by a dawning understanding. He wasn't just dealing with a waitress with an unusual hobby. He was dealing with an expert. Dr. Sallow Tariq asked, his voice dangerously soft, the disgraced historian from Cambridge. The very same eye confirmed a bitter satisfaction welling inside me. Sallow had been censured for minor academic plagiarism years ago, but had managed to keep his reputation largely intact, fading into the lucrative world of private consulting, the world where men like Finch found their forgers. He was once my professor, and my mentor. This particular blend of artistic talent and academic arrogance is his calling card. Finch finally found his voice a reedy, desperate sound. "She's lying. This is a personal vendetta. She's an unstable former student with a grudge, Tariq. You are a man of logic. Are you truly going to let this fantasy derail everything? It is precisely because I am a man of logic that I am still listening, Tariq retorted, his voice cutting like steel. He turned back to me. You claim there are more errors. Tell me about the lapis lazuli, the star of Orshur. This was my moment to solidify my case beyond any doubt. The stone is beautiful, I began, but it's from the wrong place. The lapis used by the Assyrian royal courts in that specific period came almost exclusively from the Badakhshan mines in what is now Afghanistan. That source has a unique mineral signature, tiny, almost invisible pyrite inclusions. Under magnification, they glitter like gold dust. The lapis used in 19th century revival pieces, and by modern forgers, typically comes from mines in Chile. That lapis has calcite streaks, not pyrite. It's a cleaner, less complex blue. I looked at the stone capping the scepter. Even from a few feet away, I could see the telltale, milky white veins within the deep blue. Get a jeweler's loupe. You won't find a single fleck of pyrite in that stone. You'll find calcite. Finch was visibly trembling now. He was being dismantled piece by a woman in a service uniform. The humiliation was radiating from him in palpable waves. She cannot possibly know that from here, he protested weakly. A simple test will prove it, won't it? Tariq said. He turned to one of his bodyguards. Karim, my briefcase. The small black case inside. Karim nodded, retrieved a sleek leather briefcase, and produced a small, hard-shelled case. The Sheikh opened it. Inside was a set of high-end portable tools, a digital microscope, a spectrometer, and a jeweler's loupe. This was a man who, despite his emotional connection, never went into a deal unprepared. He was a collector, not just a buyer. He picked up the loupe. He approached the scepter, not with reverence now, but with the cold, calculating eye of an examiner. He leaned in, placing the loupe to his eye, and scrutinized the stone. The room was so quiet, I could hear the faint whir of the air conditioning. Finch looked like a man watching his own execution. After a long, agonizing minute, Tariq straightened up. He placed the loupe back on the table with a soft, definitive click. He looked at Finch, and his face was a mask of cold fury. Calcite, he said, the single word landing like a death sentence. Finch staggered back a step, his face ashen. The charm, the charisma, the entire carefully constructed persona evaporated in an instant, leaving behind a desperate, cornered man. There must be a mistake, a misunderstanding. The Institute will be hearing from my lawyers, Tariq said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. And you, Mr. Finch, will be hearing from the authorities. He glanced at his other bodyguard. Amir. Call the police. Inform them we have a gentleman here who has attempted to commit fraud to the sum of $200 million. Amir reached for his phone. Finch let out a choked cry. No, wait, please, I was misled. The provenance, Sallow assured me. His pleas were pathetic, dissolving into panicked babble. As Amir calmly spoke into his phone, Tariq turned his full attention back to me. The anger in his expression softened, replaced by a look of profound, searching curiosity. You were Dr. Petrova, he said, remembering what I had said earlier. It was a statement. Not a question. I replied, my voice quiet. What happened? The story I had buried for 3 years threatened to spill out. The excitement of my discovery, the trust I had placed in Sallow, the crushing moment I saw my research, my words, my soul published under his name, the dismissive laughter of the academic board, the slow, painful death of my career. Professor Sallow stole my research. I said the words tasting like ash. He built the end of his career on the beginning of mine, and when I tried to fight it, he made sure no university would ever hire me again. The sheikh listened, his dark eyes never leaving my face. In them I saw not pity, but respect. He was a man who understood betrayal. He understood the value of truth and the price of lies. The clatter of my spilled glass on the rug, the mess I had made to get his attention, seemed a lifetime ago. I had walked into this room as a waitress, but I was no longer sure who I would be when I walked out. The arrival of the police was a quiet, ruthlessly efficient affair. There were no flashing lights, no sirens. 2 plainclothes detectives entered the Medici suite, introduced by Amir, and the atmosphere immediately shifted from a private dispute to a criminal investigation. Arthur Finch, stripped of his bravado, seemed to shrink before our eyes. He was a deflated balloon, his expensive suit now looking like a costume on a failed actor. He continued to protest his arguments, becoming increasingly frantic and contradictory. He blamed his experts. He blamed Sallow. He claimed he was as much a victim as the sheikh. But his protestations were hollow, his credibility incinerated. One of the detectives, a sharp-eyed woman named Detective Harding, listened patiently. While her partner took Finch's preliminary statement, she came over to me. "Ma'am, we're going to need a statement from you as well." She said, her tone professional, but not unkind. "You're the one who identified the forgery." "Yes," I said. "And your credentials?" Before I could answer, Sheikh Tariq spoke. "Her credentials are unimpeachable," he stated, his voice carrying an absolute authority that made the detective raise an eyebrow. "She is Dr. Lena Petrova, one of an exceedingly small number of experts in this field. It appears the art world's loss has been the hospitality industry's temporary gain." The compliment, so understated and yet so powerful, sent a warmth through my chest. For the first time in 3 years, someone had referred to me by my proper title, and not with pity or scorn, but with genuine respect. As Finch was being escorted out, his face a mask of disbelief, Karim, the sheikh's head of security, re-entered the room. He held a tablet and approached his employer. "Sir," he said quietly, "we ran the name you asked for. Dr. Alistair Sallow." Tariq nodded. "And he's not in Cambridge anymore. He has a private workshop in a rural estate just outside of Brussels. Very exclusive. We cross-referenced flight manifests. Arthur Finch flew to Brussels 3 times in the last 2 months. The last time was 2 days ago." Karim swiped the screen. "And there's more. We ran a quick financial trace on Finch. A significant portion of his operating capital comes from an offshore account that has been previously linked to Sallow in an unrelated inquiry regarding the illegal antiquities trade." It was the final nail in the coffin. The connection was direct and irrefutable. Sallow wasn't just the forger. He was likely the mastermind with Finch as his charismatic frontman. Interpol will be interested to hear that Detective Harding noted having overheard the exchange. She made a quick note in her pad. "Thank you, Mr. Al-Jamil." The room began to empty. The detectives left with a subdued Finch in tow. The bodyguards began to pack away their employer's equipment. Soon it was just me and Sheikh Tariq, standing in the silent, opulent room, with the fraudulent scepter, still resting in its case, a $200 million lie. Tariq walked over to the case and closed the lid with a soft, final click. The sound echoed the closing of a chapter. "Dr. Petrova," he said, turning to face me, "I owe you a debt of gratitude that money cannot possibly repay." "You owe me nothing, sir," I said honestly. I couldn't stand by and watch him do that. It was an insult to you, and an insult to the history he was twisting for profit. Nevertheless, he insisted. He preyed on my family's history, my heritage. You did not just save me from financial loss. You protected something far more valuable. You honored that history with your truth." He paused, studying me with a thoughtful expression. "This is no place for you," he said, gesturing vaguely at the restaurant around us. "A mind like yours should not be polishing silver." I gave a small, wry smile. "It pays the bills, sir." "I can do better than that," he said. "For years I have been acquiring pieces of my country's history, buying them back from private collections and museums around the world. But I am a businessman, not a scholar. I have been guided by experts, and today I have learned that not all experts can be trusted." He walked closer, his expression earnest. "I am establishing a foundation. Its sole purpose will be the recovery, authentication, and preservation of these artifacts. I want to build a world-class team, funded with whatever it takes to do the job properly. A team built not on reputation, but on integrity and genuine brilliance." My heart began to beat faster. I knew where this was going, but it seemed too fantastic to be real. "I need someone to lead it," he said, his eyes holding mine. "Someone with an unwavering commitment to the truth. Someone who can spot a lie from across a room. Someone like you." I was speechless. The offer was staggering. It wasn't just a job. It was a resurrection. It was the chance to do the work I loved on a scale I had never dreamed of, with the resources to do it right. It was a chance to reclaim my name and my life's work. "I don't know what to say," I stammered. "Say you'll consider it," he said with a small smile. "I am returning to my home country in 2 days. Come with me. See the collection I have already amassed. See the work that needs to be done. Then give me your answer." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, tears of shock and overwhelming gratitude. 3 hours ago, my biggest concern had been whether a customer would complain about his steak being overcooked. Now I was being offered the keys to a kingdom I thought I had lost forever. The ghost of the gilded liar. The invisible waitress was being offered a chance to be seen again. And not just seen, but celebrated for the very knowledge that had once led to her downfall. The 2 days that followed were a surreal whirlwind. I resigned from the gilded liar, an act that felt as momentous as signing a treaty. My manager was bewildered, unable to comprehend why the quiet, reliable Lena was suddenly leaving, especially after the incident in the Medici suite, which had become the stuff of restaurant legend. I simply told him I had been offered a research position. It was the understatement of the century. True to his word, Sheikh Tariq al-Jamil arranged everything. A seat on his private jet, a suite in a hotel that made the gilded liar look like a roadside diner, and most importantly, a temporary passport to a new life. As the jet climbed into the sky, leaving the city and my old existence behind, I felt a profound sense of release. The weight of the past 3 years, the bitterness and the regret seemed to fall away with the receding skyline. The story of the foiled scam hit the international news, though my name was kept out of it, at the Sheikh's insistence protecting my privacy. Arthur Finch, and more satisfyingly, Dr. Alistair Sallow, were arrested. The investigation into their fraudulent enterprise uncovered a network of forgeries they had sold to collectors and museums across the globe. My one act of defiance in that dining room had triggered an earthquake in the world of antiquities, and the aftershocks were toppling corrupt careers and revealing uncomfortable truths. Professor Sallow's academic crimes against me became a footnote in a much larger story of his criminal genius. But for me, it was the final public vindication. When we arrived in his home country, Sheikh Tariq was no longer just a businessman. He was a national figure, a modernizer with a deep reverence for the past. He took me to a state-of-the-art climate-controlled facility, a private museum he had been building in secret. Room after room was filled with priceless artifacts, cuneiform tablets, intricate jewelry pottery that traced the arc of civilization, and statues that had once stood in ancient temples. It was the collection I had spent my life dreaming of. Much of this has been authenticated by the best teams in the world, he said, as we stood before a display of Assyrian reliefs. But after my experience with Mr. Finch, I now question everything. I need to know for certain that what I am preserving is truth, not fiction. That was the mission he offered me. Not just to be a director, but to be the chief authenticator, the ultimate arbiter of truth for his collection and for all future acquisitions. He gave me an unlimited budget, the power to hire my own team, and complete academic freedom. He didn't want a subordinate. He wanted a partner in his quest for preservation. I accepted without a moment's hesitation. In the months that followed, I built the Al Jamil Foundation for Heritage Preservation from the ground up. I sought out the brightest, most passionate, and often most overlooked scholars in the world, people like me who had been pushed to the margins by the politics and egos of traditional academia. We became a team of intellectual detectives using cutting-edge science and deep historical knowledge to peel back the layers of time on each artifact. We found 2 more forgeries in the Sheikh's existing collection, subtle, brilliant fakes that had fooled everyone. But they didn't fool us. My team and I worked with a relentless passion, driven by a shared love for the truth. My life was transformed. I traded my Waitress uniform for lab coats and expedition gear. My days were spent deciphering ancient texts, analyzing pottery shards under electron microscopes, and traveling the world to track down lost pieces of history. I was no longer Lena Petrova, the woman whose past had been stolen. I was Dr. Petrova, the curator of truth, a woman who was building a future by safeguarding the past. Sometimes, in the quiet of the labs late at night, surrounded by the silent witnesses of forgotten empires, I would think back to that night in the Medici suite. I would remember the fear, the trembling hand, the split-second decision to act. It was a single moment of courage, a refusal to remain invisible that had changed everything. I had spoken up not just for myself, but for the integrity of history itself. And in doing so, I found that the voice I thought I had lost was not only still there, but was stronger and clearer than ever before. I had not just reclaimed my career. I had found my purpose. And it all started with a single perfectly spoken word that exposed a lie and revealed a truth that had been waiting patiently in the shadows. A year can change everything. 12 months after I stepped onto Sheikh Tariq al-Jamil's private jet, the name Dr. Lena Petrova was once again spoken with respect in the hallowed halls of academia and the exclusive back rooms of the art world. The Al Jamil Foundation for Heritage Preservation was no longer a fledgling idea. It was a global force. We had successfully repatriated a dozen stolen artifacts, exposed a forgery ring operating out of Geneva, and funded 3 major archaeological digs that were already yielding incredible results. I was no longer just a scholar. I was a guardian of history, and the life I led as a waitress felt like a distant, half-forgotten dream. But one piece of the past remained unresolved. Arthur Finch had long since been sentenced his testimony against his partner, buying him a slightly reduced prison term. The true architect of the fraud, however, had spent the last year fighting his fate. Dr. Ho. Alistair Sallow, my former mentor and the man who had stolen my life, had pleaded not guilty, claiming he was a scapegoat, an academic framed by a desperate conman. His trial was the final ghost I had to face. I was the prosecution's star witness. The day I walked into the courtroom, the air was thick with a tense, scholarly silence. I saw Sallow sitting beside his lawyer. He looked older, smaller than I remembered the years of stress having withered the arrogant charisma he once possessed. But when his eyes met mine, I saw the same cold, dismissive glare. There was no remorse, only a venomous hatred for the student he had failed to crush. When I took the stand, the prosecutor walked me through the events of that night at the Gilded Lyre. I explained the linguistic anachronisms, the metallurgical inconsistencies, the flawed mineralogy of the lapis lazuli. I spoke with a calm, unwavering authority, presenting the complex data in a way the jury could easily understand. I wasn't the trembling waitress anymore. I was a world-renowned expert in my field, and the courtroom was my lecture hall. Then came the cross-examination. Sallow's lawyer, a slick man with a predatory smile, approached the stand. His strategy was clear from the first question. He wasn't going to attack the evidence. He was going to attack me. Dr. Petrova, he began, his tone dripping with false respect. Is it true that before your sudden rise to fame, you were employed as a waitress? Yes, that's correct, I replied evenly. And is it also true that your academic career ended rather abruptly? Some years ago, following a dispute with my client, Dr. Sallow, I would characterize the theft of my doctoral thesis as more than a dispute. I countered, my voice firm. The lawyer smirked. A serious accusation, one that was never proven. In fact, the university sided with Dr. Sallow, did it not? You were effectively dismissed from the academic community. You must have felt a great deal of resentment. I felt a great deal of injustice, I corrected him. So you're working your shifter job you took after your chosen career fell apart, and you just happened to overhear a private conversation involving the very man you blame for your misfortunes. And in that moment, you saw an opportunity for revenge, didn't you? A way to destroy the man you felt had destroyed you. He was painting a compelling picture, the bitter, vengeful student striking out at her successful mentor. I could feel the jury's eyes on me, their expressions uncertain. This was the moment. The ghost was no longer at my back. It was standing right in front of me. I took a deep breath. No counselor. That's not what happened. I saw an opportunity to stop a crime. My personal history with Dr. Sallow was not the reason I spoke up, but it is the reason I was uniquely qualified to do so. I turned my attention, slightly addressing the jury directly. Doctor, Sallow's academic work, and by extension, his work as a forger, has a specific flaw, a signature, if you will. He is a brilliant artist, but a lazy scholar. He cuts corners on the research. The scepter was a perfect example, a beautiful object, but historically illiterate. I then looked directly at Sallow, just like the thesis he stole from me. My original research contained a groundbreaking but controversial theory. When Dr. Sallow published my work as his own, he removed the controversial parts, the parts he didn't fully understand and couldn't defend. He published a watered-down, safer version. He stole the body of my work, but he left the soul behind because he was too arrogant to admit he couldn't grasp it. The prosecutor, seeing his opening, stood up. Your Honor, we have evidence to that effect. He produced a set of documents, my original time-stamped research notes from my university days, complete with the detailed controversial theories Sallow had omitted, and beside it, Sallow's published paper. The plagiarism was undeniable, but more than that, the intellectual cowardice I had just described was laid bare for all to see. Sallow's lawyer was speechless. His client had been exposed not just as a forger, but as a thief and a fraud in his own field. The scepter was no longer an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a career built on lies. I left the stand, my head held high. I didn't look at Sallow again. He was no longer a titan who had ruined my life. He was just a sad old man whose deceptions had finally caught up with him. The guilty verdict came 2 days later. As I stood on the courthouse steps, breathing in the free air, I felt the last chain to my past break away. The victory wasn't in Sallow's conviction. It was in my own vindication. I had reclaimed not just my career, but my story. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Sheikh Tariq. It simply said, "The truth always prevails. Now about that dig site in Oman, I think we're about to find something remarkable." I smiled. The past was settled. The future was waiting to be discovered. And that's the incredible story of how one woman's hidden knowledge and a single moment of courage brought down a $200 million scam and changed her life forever. Lena Petrova's story is a powerful reminder that our true value is not defined by our current circumstances, but by the passion and knowledge we hold within. She went from being an invisible waitress to a world-renowned expert, all because she refused to stay silent in the face of a lie. It shows that integrity is a superpower, and sometimes the quietest voice in the room is the one that speaks the most profound truth. What did you think of Lena's brave decision? Let us know in the comments below. If this story inspired you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing real-life dramas. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching.